So this is an interesting story. The Cailin Ban. Cailin Ban literally means Irish girl. Cailin is the Irish for girl, and Ban is the Irish for white. And Ellen Hanley was the Cailin Ban, born in the Commons, Ballingarry, and Ballingarry is a townland of Knockfearn, a townland of Ballingarry technically, but at the foot of Knockfearn on the other side of the hill as we look at it here. And we are walking up. This way, and I'll tell you the story of Ellen Hanley, the Cailin Ban. It's quite a famous story, and you can find lots about it online, and you'll find books. A local guy from Ballingarry called Padraig Fitzgerald wrote a very good book, and sold out a few years ago. So he wrote a story. I haven't read it, I have to confess, but I'm fairly familiar with the story. And Ellen Hanley was born, as I said, in Ballingarry, which is the other side of the hill. We'll see it here when we get to the top of the hill. And Ellen was said to be the most beautiful girl alive. She was supposed to have been stunning, and I'm sure she was. But she was born into very, not just poor, but unfortunate circumstances. And her mother died when she was very, very young. And that time, girls would have had to stay at home, look after, if there were other children, would have had to look after them. Or if the father couldn't cope with them, they were sent to other members of the families who would take them in and look after them as their own. And that's how things were done. But Ellen didn't move too far away. She moved to an aunt over in Croom, which is about, I guess, 2-3 miles as the crow flies from here. And there she lived and grew up, and as I say, grew into be a most beautiful woman. Where she came under the eye of the son of a local landowner, a fellow by the name of Scanlon. I think he was John Scanlon. And of course, she being of her background and him being of his, he was a former Marine in the, I think it was the Fusiliers, but I'm not 100% certain of that. The fact that he was a British soldier at all would have meant that the common, ordinary people didn't want anything to do with him. And Ellen Hanley would not have been considered to have been in his class at all, but Hanlon wasn't for turning. He obviously fancied her, and as a result, he ran away with her. Now, he didn't go too far. He went to a town called Glynn, which is down at the mouth of the Shannon Estuary. It's in County Limerick. Beautiful place, actually, Glynn, with a lovely history in its own right. But Ellen Hanley went down there, and nobody knew who she was, of course. I mean, you might say Glynn is only a short distance away, and it is now. But that time, when you only had horseback or walking, and that was the only way you could get around places, she was completely unknown and was taken in as the wife of Scanlon. But there was no record of them actually being married. And eventually, Scanlon's family got wind of where he was. Of course, they had the resources, they were wealthy, and they found out where he was. And he was told that he would be written out of the will. And needless to say, the fact of being written out of a will wasn't anything that was going to stop him from leaving Ellen Hanley, but he didn't leave her. He employed a local guy, and I say employed, he was already working for him, but he employed him to dispose of Ellen Hanley. Fooled her into getting into a boat one night, strangled her and threw her into the Shannon. Her body was found sometime later down near Money Point. And after some time there was an investigation, and Scanlon and Sullivan were charged with the murder of Ellen Hanley. Scanlon was caught first, and Sullivan escaped. They called him Stampy because Stampy was a nickname that they used. They also, there's a term used, a bit of a 5/8, so he's not the full shilling, in other words. So it was agreed in court that it was Sullivan that did the killing, but he implicated, in his statements, he implicated Scanlon. And Scanlon, who was caught first, was sentenced to die, and he was hanged in Limerick in disgrace near a place called Garryowen, which is inside in the city of Limerick. And he was hanged there. Sullivan escaped, and Sullivan was missing for about 12 months, and they eventually found him. And of course he was eventually hanged as well. If the son of the landlord was hanged, then Sullivan hadn't a hope in hell of escaping it. And he was also hanged for his troubles. And Ellen Hanley is buried over in Kilrush, and there's a monument at her grave now, which was put up by a local landlord or a local dignitary who had heard the story and thought it was horrific. And of course it was horrific, aside of the fact that there was a young lady murdered. The whole thing about, the advantage, the privilege of Scanlon, the advantage he was in a position to take of Ellen Hanley. She didn't need to die. He could have just left her, because as I said, there's no records of them actually being married, so he could have left, but he didn't do that. And she was murdered. So it's a very, very famous story around these parts. So here we are at what we believe used to be what's called a mass rock, and the connection between this, strangely enough, and the Cailin Ban story is that Catholics were forbidden from practicing their religion. They were forbidden from speaking Irish. They were forbidden from teaching in Irish. They were forbidden from doing anything in Irish. But of course, they didn't have schools to learn English either, so they were at a complete disadvantage. This was a deliberate policy from the British authorities at the time. And the only thing that people had was their little bit of religion. And so they used to meet in secret at places called Mass Rocks. And there was believed to have been Mass up here said regularly by the local priest, because you weren't allowed to use the church. The churches sometimes were taken over by the British, or they were destroyed by them. But they persevered, and despite all its failings, and there are many, the Catholic Church did help people through all this, and their faith was very important to them. Because I guess it was just one of the things that kind of kept them going, that there is a better life after the misery that they have, and hearing Mass was part of that. But here was the Mass Rock, so it would have been said in secret. And of course if they were caught, they were arrested and then jailed for a while. Jail wasn't a very pleasant place to be at all. And of course, the other thing that they had was a thing called hedge schools. And hedge schools were schools literally by a hedge. So a teacher would give up his or her free time, mostly his, because the women stayed at home looking after children. That was how it was. And the teachers gave up their time to teach. And they would teach Oscar in Irish. And in hedges, literally in the cover of hedges. So that's how a lot of people got an education. And the connection between this and the Cailin Ban story is that Catholic emancipation was eventually fought and got for Ireland by a guy called Daniel O'Connell. He was a very famous barrister from Dingle in County Kerry. If you guys ever come over here, I'd love to think that I could take you to Dingle. Daniel O'Connell was a very unusual individual in that he was Catholic, and he was also a member of the upper class. He was very well educated, he was a barrister, and he eventually got Catholic emancipation for Ireland. So then, once Catholic emancipation was got, I think it was 1829, but I may stand corrected on that. It was around that time anyway, the 1820s, 1830s. Daniel O'Connell got emancipation, and then there was a bit more freedom. They still couldn't do what they wanted, but they at least they could celebrate. And of course, some in the church took advantage of all that, and that legacy is still with us. But Daniel O'Connell, the barrister, defended Scanlon, the guy who was convicted of murdering Ellen Handley. As I say, he was a barrister and a very clever man, and that's the connection between, kind of a subtle connection, isn't it, really, between here and the murder of Ellen Handley, or the murderer of Ellen Handley. So that's it with the Mass Rock. There's Knockfearna, and just down here, the other side of those trees, is Ballingarry. So that's where Ellen Handley was born, and that's County Cork. The near hill there is County Limerick, but farther over there is the Balhauras. And they're the ones in the very, very background. That's the Galties, and they're in Tipperary. So you've quite a distance that you can see from here. You know, that's the other view down towards South Limerick, West Limerick, and North Cork. And we're really close here. We just go up here, have a look at these. I'm sorry this video is so long now. I hadn't intended it to be this long. I'll have to do my editing or preparations a bit better. But that's what's up there. That's the tower for the mobile phones. You can't get in there. Not that I want to. Not that I want to. And we have horses. People come up here on horses. Horse poop everywhere. So there you go.